One of the things I'm still finding myself talking about in these videos, amongst a whole range of different understandings of knowledge, and like I've said before, I'm not even sure if that's the right word, perhaps imagination is a better term than knowledge. But to the extent that I am using that term, one of the differences I'm finding is between knowledge that might be called sort of secular and knowledge which seems to be more to do with metaphysics or spirituality or enlightenment, something like that. The various knowledge forms that are characterized in Polanyi's writing, for example, in terms of being tacit or explicit, procedural knowledge as against propositional knowledge, the sort of knowledge that David Perkins talks about, possessive, performative, and proactive, seems to be, it's dispositional, but it's still sort of knowledge, it's still highly secular. And yet occasionally I find myself being interested in and talking about and sort of being referred from knowledge which seems to be about enlightenment, as I say, and to do with metaphysics. And I'm trying to work out what the distinction is and map that distinction or relate that distinction to the overall image schema that I'm working with, which I'll just reiterate again. It's this idea that the map of knowledge, the map of epistemology, is based on a relatively common experience of standing in a brightly lit space, or perhaps even moving through a brightly lit space, with all of one's senses engaged to the world, so that differences in knowledge forms map across from differences in sensory access and in the differences of the entailments to do with those that sensory access. So what's the distinction? So is there a distinction between what might be called secular knowledge in all its massive varieties and this other kind of knowledge that one finds in Desjardins or in Harding or in Krishnamurti or in some of the other people that I've been mentioning? It seems to me that one of the key breakpoints is to do with what in Enlightenment terms is sometimes also called non-duality, which is the distinction between, there's quite a number of non-dualities in play there, but I think the key one is the distinction between subject and object, between the knower and the known, the dancer and the dance, if you like, that kind of duality. In all secular knowledge forms, even the most experiential and the most embodied and the most tacit, the most proactive, there is still this sense, I suspect, that there is somehow a divide between the knowledge and the knower, or in metaphorical sense, between the organ of sensing and the thing sensed, if you like. So there's always a point of contact between the knowledge and the knower, if you like, even if that point of contact is very, very intimate, very, very close to the center of one's being. In secular knowledge, nevertheless, even if it's something to do with taste, there is always the taste bud and the thing tasted, if you like. And even in gut feelings, there is the gut and there is the feeling that the gut is having. As I understand it, in non-dual understandings of knowledge, metaphysical knowledge, enlightened knowledge, that kind of thing, that separation doesn't hold, or is not considered to be part of a desirable component of the overall experience. One tries to dissolve that boundary between the knower and the known. And here I'm just reminded very briefly of something that somebody said at a kind of colloquium on Douglas Harding's work that I went to in Salisbury last year. And this chap was just talking about this experience he had where he's looking out on the beach as the sun was going down. It was a beautiful sunset, red sky, the rays of the sun shooting up through the clouds at the back. A great, one of the great evocative images that nature can produce. But he said although he was enjoying this experience, he was also aware that there was the sunset and there was him looking at the sunset. So there's always this kind of duality, which I think, and that's the kind of duality I think I'm indicating as a possible point of difference. That even in a moment like that, when one is maybe quite deeply and profoundly moved and affected and touched emotionally in ways that aren't easily to express in words, which can be very difficult to convert into any kind of possessive knowledge. Even in those moments, there is this sense of there being a dual quality to the experience. There is the knowing and there is the being, if I can refer back to Polanyi one more time. Whereas in enlightenment states, in non-dual states, in spiritual states, presumably, there is no separation between knowing and being. There is, I don't know which of those we'd elect, but there is either just knowing or just being, or that becomes a meaningless distinction. I suspect beyond that distinction, however, the rest of the map that I'm sort of messing about with, that image schema of standing in a brightly lit space with one's senses engaged, nevertheless still has some sort of currency. So even in quite elaborate formulations of that you do find in Harding, or you do find in Krishnamurti, or you do find in Desjardins, when Desjardins is writing about the omega point, or is writing about this idea that all that rises must converge, presumably that convergence involves divine union, given that he's Christian, it would be that sort of term he would use, or some sort of non-dual dissolving into a greater sense of being. But apart from that dual, non-dual distinction, the rest of the map holds good. You rise, in Desjardins, you rise and converge so that you have a greater outlook, a greater overview, a greater visual experience, visually understood experience of the totality of what is, including one's own self. So that's where I'm going with that so far. And I'm sitting in a car park in Leeds today. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm not rising, I'm not converging, and I'm not moving.